Welcome to another deep dive. You guys have sent us some really fascinating excerpts this time around, all dealing with the Melchizedek teachings
Right.
and how they kind of reverberated across the ancient world.
It's like we're about to trace the footsteps of an idea, watching how this belief in one God ripples outward
Right.
and leaves its mark on, well, some pretty influential civilizations.
It's like a historical mystery tour.
Exactly.
We're going way back, way before the Roman Empire, before even the Golden Age of Greece.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, around 2000 BCE.
And what a time of upheaval and change, right?
Yeah.
Imagine a world where you've got multiple gods being worshipped, often with rituals and practices that, well, let's just say they might raise a few eyebrows today.
Get more colorful than we're used to, maybe.
Yeah, to put it mildly. And into this world step the Salem missionaries, bringing with them this radical, truly revolutionary message. One God, the Father and Maker of all.
Talk about shaking things up. And it wasn't just talk either, right? The Urantia book describes how they tried to, make this abstract idea resonate with the Mesopotamians.
Oh, absolutely. They really tried to meet people where they were at.
They even tried to simplify that whole pantheon down to 7 major deities.
A valiant effort, wouldn't you say? But as the book points out, they ran into a bit of a roadblock, mainly Ishtar.
Ishtar, right?
This goddess whose worship was so deeply intertwined with Mesopotamian culture, their social practices.
It's especially, it seems, when it came to the role of women.
Exactly. And that clash of values, it really led to the decline of the Salem teachings in that region.
It's kind of sad, in a way. It makes you wonder, though, if those early missionaries could have foreseen how their efforts, even if they seemed unsuccessful at the time, how they would echo down through history.
It's incredible to think about.
Some scholars even suggest that some of the Psalms we read today, those ancient hymns, might actually have roots in those early Mesopotamian teachings.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? To think that something as enduring as the Bible might contain these whispers of a forgotten religious movement from millennia ago.
Okay, so Mesopotamia was a bit of a mixed bag. What happens as these ideas kind of drift south to Egypt? Now, the Egyptians, they already had a pretty sophisticated understanding of the afterlife, but their relationship with the divine was, well, let's just say they had a god for everything.
You're not kidding. Ancient Egypt was like a tapestry of local deities, right? You had gods linked to animals, natural forces, even specific cities.
Right. Each with their own temples, their own rituals, their own stories.
I was very localized, very, as the Urantia book calls it, tribal.
Tribal, okay. But even within that system, you start to see the seeds of something different taking root, right? We've got someone like a Menemope, who basically says, hold on, everyone, stop obsessing over tombs and rituals and start focusing on living a righteous life right now. I'm paraphrasing, of course.
No, you've got the gist of it. And his words, they had an impact far beyond Egypt's borders, too. Think about it. This Egyptian sage and his ideas about conscience and ethical conduct, they end up influencing texts like the Hebrew Book of Proverbs, even find their way into Greek philosophical thought.
It's like this ripple effect across time and cultures. And that's just one example, right?
Oh, yeah.
The real rock star of this Egyptian chapter has to be Akhenaten. Talk about ambition. This pharaoh attempts to completely overhaul Egyptian religion, replacing their vast pantheon with the worship of a single god, Akhenaten.
It's a period in Egyptian history that still fascinates scholars to this day. Imagine the audacity, right?
Yeah.
To try and shift an entire nation's spiritual understanding in a single generation. And he almost pulled it off, too.
He made some bold moves, that's for sure. But like you said, it was ultimately short-lived.
Right.
What does the Urantia book say about why Akhenaten's reforms ultimately failed to take hold? Was it just too much too fast?
Well, the Urantia book, it offers a couple of really interesting explanations, actually.
Okay.
It talks about how, while Akhenaten, he definitely had the spiritual zeal, right?
Yeah.
He kind of lacked the political savvy of someone like Moses, who the book points out was actually able to unite a people and lead them through hardship.
Interesting.
Akhenaten also, he faced a ton of pushback from the Egyptian priesthood.
Oh, right, of course. They probably weren't too thrilled about this whole one god idea.
Not one bit. They saw their power, their influence being threatened by his reforms.
It's a classic power struggle when you think about it.
Totally.
And it just goes to show how even religious movements, even with the best of intentions, they can get caught up in politics and social structures.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not like Akhenaten was a complete failure. right?
Yeah.
I mean, his ideas, they didn't just vanish overnight.
Right. There were still traces of his influence.
The Urantia book actually draws this really fascinating parallel between Akhenaten and Jesus. Did you know that?
No, I don't think so.
It talks about how Jesus, as a young child, remember how the gospel tells us he was taken to Egypt?
Yeah, to escape Herod, right.
Exactly. And the book seems to suggest that some in Egypt, maybe those who still held on to Akhenaten's teachings, they saw a connection between the two.
Whoa, you're blowing my mind right now.
It's like this crazy historical what-if moment.
Seriously,
Yeah.
It just makes you realize how even small events or seemingly insignificant events can have these huge ripple effects.
Oh, totally. And it speaks to the power of ideas, right? How they can stick around long after.
Right.
But hey, let's shift gears geographically for a bit. We've seen how this whole one God concept, how it fared in Mesopotamia and Egypt.
Okay.
What about further east, in Persia?
Persia, that's a whole other ballgame, right?
Yeah.
Did the Salem missionaries have any more luck there?
So, from the excerpts you sent me, it seems like Persia was actually, at least initially, they were a bit more receptive to the Salem teachings.
Okay.
But then things changed.
Yeah, what happened?
A new dynasty came into power, one that wasn't quite as tolerant of these monotheistic ideas.
Makes sense.
The Salem missionaries, they faced persecution, their communities were scattered, their teaching, well, they were basically driven underground.
Wow.
But here's where things get really interesting. It's around this time, we're talking the 6th century BCE, that a figure named Zoroaster emerges. Have you heard of him?
Oh yeah, Zoroaster. Definitely a major figure in the history of religion. I'm not sure I see the connection to the Salem missionaries yet.
So Zoroaster, he's credited with founding Zoroastrianism, right?
Yeah.
And the Urantia book suggests that he actually, in his travels and studies, he encountered remnants of those earlier Salem teachings.
Really?
Yeah. He was particularly drawn to the concept of one supreme God.
Okay.
This idea that really resonated with him, but instead of just, taking it wholesale, he wove it into the fabric of existing Persian beliefs, creating something new.
So instead of this whole pantheon of gods, we get Ahura Mazda.
Exactly. Ahura Mazda, the one true God, locked in this cosmic struggle against the forces of evil.
It's a much more dynamic vision of the divine, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. This wasn't about passive prayer and acceptance. Zoroaster was calling on people to fight, to actively fight against the darkness and align themselves with Ahura Mazda, the god of light, wisdom, civilization.
Right. And we even see echoes of those Salem teachings in Zoroaster's emphasis on ethics, on right and wrong.
Oh, totally. It wasn't just about acknowledging Ahura Mazda's existence. It was about living a righteous life, making the right choices.
And here's where things get even wilder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Zoroastrianism, with its ideas about good versus evil, heaven and hell, even a final judgment, these ideas end up influencing both Judaism and Christianity.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Talk about a legacy. It's kind of ironic when you think about it. The Salem missionaries, they might not have established a lasting presence in Persia.
Yeah.
But their ideas, filtered through Zoroaster, ended up shaping some of the world's most influential religions.
It makes you appreciate the interconnected nature of, well, everything, doesn't it? History, religion, culture.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia. Now we got to talk about the Arabian Peninsula, right? The birthplace of Islam. But before we get to that, what does the Urantia book tell us about the Salem teachings there? Did they have any luck in that part of the world?
So it's interesting because you'd think, geographically speaking, they'd be closer to Salem, right?
Right.
But they actually faced even more obstacles there than in Persia.
Really? Why is that?
The Urantia book kind of paints this picture of the Arabian Peninsula at that time as a land of fiercely independent tribes, each with its own customs, beliefs, practices.
Right, a very tribal society.
Exactly. And the Salem missionaries, they came in with this message of organization, of centralized authority.
Which, in that context, might have backfired.
It might have hindered their efforts more than it helped.
It's a good reminder that even with the best message in the world, how you present it, how you approach people, it matters.
Couldn't agree more. So instead of finding fertile ground, the idea of one God, it just didn't stick in the way they hoped.
So it was a complete dead end.
Not entirely.
Right.
The book mentions families and clans who held onto that idea, the idea of one God.
Okay, interesting.
They clung to it, passed it down through generations.
So these little whispers of monotheism, they persisted.
They were there, hidden beneath the surface of the more dominant beliefs of the time.
It makes you wonder, what if things had gone differently?
It really does, and that's what's so fascinating about this whole exploration. But remember, Arabia does eventually embrace a form of monotheism.
Of course, Islam. But that seems like a huge jump, doesn't it? How do we get from these scattered families clinging to the idea of one God to the rise of one of the world's major religions, right, Islam? But that seems like a huge jump, doesn't it? How do we get from these scattered families clinging to the idea of one God to the rise of one of the world's major religions?
It is a big jump. And the Urantia book, it doesn't really present it as this straight line, you know?
Right.
Like, remember, we're talking about centuries here, tons of cultural exchange, power struggles, ideas evolving.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But there are definitely some fascinating clues in the text.
Like, what does the book say about this whole transition to Islam?
Well, think about the Kaaba in Mecca.
Okay.
Long before Muhammad, right? It was already this hugely important religious site.
Right, all those different tribes coming together.
Exactly, a place where they'd gather, worship their various gods.
And the Black Stone, right? That was a big deal even then.
Oh, yeah, the Black Stone of the Kaaba, still a bit of a mystery today.
Totally.
But it was this powerful, powerful symbol for them.
Okay, but how does any of that tie into this idea of monotheism?
So the Urantia book suggests that the Kaaba, it provided a focal point, you know,
Okay.
like this common ground for people who were otherwise divided by their tribes, their beliefs.
How something they could all agree on.
Yeah, exactly. It represented something bigger than all of them.
So it's like, in a way, it paved the way. It created the space for a belief system like Islam to come along.
Exactly. It's like it set the stage. And then, of course, you have Muhammad with his message of one God, this universal message.
Which really resonated with people.
Oh, absolutely. It offered this way to bridge all those old divisions, unite them under one faith.
Wow, when you put it like that, it really shows how, I don't know, how things that seem totally unrelated can actually be connected.
Right. History is rarely a straight line.
Not at all. Okay, so big picture time. We've journeyed from the banks of the Euphrates all the way to the deserts of Arabia.
It's been quite a trip.
It really has. What's the big takeaway for you? What really stood out from all these stories about monotheism?
You know, for me, it just highlights the power of ideas.
Yeah.
How they can evolve, how they can spread in ways that, honestly, the people who first had them could never have even imagined.
It's like a chain reaction almost.
Totally. And it also shows just how much humans crave connection, you know?
Yeah.
This connection to something bigger than themselves.
Whether that's through rituals or philosophy or just, I don't know, staring up at the stars.
It's all connected. And you know what? It makes you wonder, what about us?
What about us?
What ideas are we grappling with right now that might seem totally wild to people 1,000 years from now?
That's a good question.
It's like our version of, wait, just one God? Are you serious?
That's a really interesting thought to end on. It's a good reminder to, I don't know, to stay open-minded.
Oh, yeah.
To remember that we don't have all the answers.
And to keep asking those questions.
Exactly. Well, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Urantia book and, well, the surprisingly long and complicated history of monotheism. And to everyone listening, keep those sources coming.
And we'll keep exploring them together.
Until next time.